The time has come to paint this oversized Japanese panther. And nothing, it's just gonna be that. I will put some paint on it. What's up, friends, and welcome back to another episode of Night Shift. And because I'm a guy who doesn't like to waste your or my time, I'll get straight to the point. Let's start by disassembling the model. Life is much easier when you can paint stuff like wheels, tracks, or exhaust separately. And also look at this plastic cake I made. Now to change the mood a little, I once again decided to use Oxide Red Primer. Remember the last time when I used the grey one for no reason? Well, I still don't have one. It's important to spray the model in short, quick bursts. Otherwise you'll risk flooding the surface and hiding some delicate details under a coat of primer, and that would be a total bust. When it's all dry and my gloves are changed, it's time to inspect the surface for pieces of dust and other debris. Here's one example. Luckily it's pretty easy to remove such imperfections. Just take some extra fine sandpaper or sanding sponge and gently polish the surface. Ding! This technique is also useful if you want to make sure all large flat surfaces are nice and smooth. We don't want to achieve an orange peel effect after all. It's also quite obvious that this task is easy on large boring surfaces. If your model is cluttered with delicate and fragile details, you must pay a lot more attention. Now that the model is fully primed, we can fire up the compressor. I'll use glossy black Tamiya paint. Tamiya paint. It is supposed to be pronounced Tamiya. I know, but Tamiya sounds like... I'll use glossy black Tamiya paint for... Not for shadows. These are not gonna be shadows. It's a sort of safety measure. When you have some hard-to-reach parts and tight corners on your model, it's never a bad idea to spray them with black paint. This way, if you somehow won't be able or just forget to spray them with camouflage paint, there won't be bare plastic or primer showing through. Some sections are cluttered with such parts, so it's best to just spray them completely black, just like this lower hull. Now we have this model ready for some real paint. These are the paints needed to mix Japanese parched grass color. I always mix everything just by guessing without any exact ratios, but I believe in this case it was something like this. It's a recipe I learned from Mr. Steven Zaloga on Missing Links. The color should be quite similar to German dark yellow, but slightly more grey and green. It's honestly one of those very weird colors that always get me confused, like IDF sand grey or such. And also my first attempt at this paint mixture went quite south, so this time I tried really hard to get it right. So after thinning down the mixture down a bit, I proceeded to paint the model. I just went with a nice opaque layer that covered the surface evenly. I'm not a big fan of pre-shading, so I just don't see any reason to purposely leave any of the red primer or black paint showing through if I can avoid it. I also notice people often ask about air pressure or how thin their paint should be for airbrushing, and it kinda frustrates me that I don't even know the answer if someone would ask me, because I always set these things up just by guessing. Until everything feels right, I guess. I know it's not helpful at all, I know, but if anyone would find it useful, I could film a video about this, and it might as well help me, because finally I would know at what pressure I spray my models. But then again, I'm not very good at airbrushing, as you can probably tell, so it might be best to just not give bad advice at all. When the model was fully covered with the base paint layer, it was time to give it some texture. First I had to spray the entire surface with a nice thick layer of heavy chipping fluid from AK, so I did just that. It's important to not flood the surface but instead just cover it evenly, so the layer should be thick enough to cover every last bit of the model without flooding, aka collecting in large amounts in corners. The amount also depends on the upcoming paint layer, so if it's gonna be light, one layer of chipping fluid should be enough. Then I deposited a small amount of the base paint into another jar and added more grey to make it lighter and also less saturated. This will be our layer of faded paint. I sprayed it over the entire model in an uneven manner. By uneven I mean this zigzag random pattern which looks like I spilled my spaghetti over the surface. I didn't take small surface details like hatches into account, I just went over them. So the point of this step is not adding highlights or shadows, just random texture. I know it doesn't look like that right now, but we'll take care of that in a moment. Your paint mixture should be quite thin, and it's also important to spray just a light layer of paint so it's gonna be easy to chip. Keep in mind that we're spraying this over a layer of heavy chipping fluid. Let's now get some tap water and start chipping the paint. It's best to work in small segments like you're seeing here. First you need to gently apply water without flooding the surface. Then you can start chipping the paint. Because the paint layer is thin and we have a decent layer of chipping fluid underneath, the paint will go down fairly easily. Now some of you might already know what I'm doing here. It's a technique I like to call distressing. The point of this is to create not just faded and weathered paint, but to also simulate random patterns of discoloration and wear. This technique is based on photos of real vehicles, especially ones from recent conflicts, but we can also see this effect on black and white pictures from both world wars. You can use it to create anything from faded paint to layers of cake, dust or grime. The possibilities are endless. However, there's a small catch, and I even made this mistake here. I was too afraid to change the color too much and end up with some crazy shade of grey or yellow, and as a result, the contrast is not strong enough. This means all of this work will be covered up with the upcoming techniques, unfortunately. This is the result of me not being familiar with this color, and if you've seen my Soviet ball tank video, which you can watch by clicking here in case you haven't, you'll know I did a much better job there, simply because I have more experience with painting Soviet tanks, and know fairly well what I can or can't do. So in the end this step was probably completely pointless, but time will tell. And because of this small bump in the road, I decided to focus more on techniques like oil paints and chipping to get the most out of this model. And I'll most likely cover these steps in more detail in the upcoming videos. So let's now move on. There's something that looks like a patch of olive drab on the other side of the tank. I believe this was simply brush painted by the occupation forces, so I chose the same approach. Live color paints are great for brush application, as you might have already seen a few times on my channel. You just need to thin them down a little bit with water and apply them in 2 layers. I wanted to achieve that nasty finish with visible brush strokes and the underlying color showing through here and there. But again, if you're aiming for this type of surface, it's very important to proceed with care and take your time. Otherwise, you'll end up with a poor result that will look as if you didn't know how to paint. You know what I mean. When all was said and done, I was ready to apply the markings. Because those are quite specific and I didn't want to paint them by hand, I designed them using photos of the real thing and got them made as stencils by my friend Alex from Solidscale. To transfer these complex letters on the model, I covered each stencil with clear tape. This will ensure the stencil won't fall apart while I'm manipulating it. Transferring them on the model requires careful positioning, checking references and making small corrections until you're happy with the result. I used the return roller as my reference point on the other side, so I could compare that with real photos. Then I applied the stencil the same way. The process is very easy because they are transparent and overall manipulation is very pleasant thanks to their high quality. Then I firmly press the stencil against the surface with a toothpick to make sure it will stay in place. Now I was able to remove the clear tape. I probably made a mistake because the tape was sticking to the stencil really well and wasn't as easy to remove. Next time I'll stick the tape a few times to my workbench to remove some of that glue beforehand. This time it was holding so strong even some letters came off. Not a bad thing if you ask me, but still. With the tape out of the way, I now remove the letters. This is another slow-paced job that requires patience, but it's also rewarding, and it's also pleasant to watch. With letters like O, R or D, you have to hold the inner part of the letter in place while removing the rest. It's like assembling puzzle in reverse. Then I applied some masking tape around the stencil to prevent overspray. That's one of the most horrific things that can happen, so better be safe than sorry. And by using Tamiya flat white, I finally sprayed the markings. I kept aiming the airbrush completely straight against the surface to avoid any accidental underspray. Although these stencils hold well, it's again better to be safe. You can also notice I sprayed each marking unevenly. Some are more white, others are less opaque. Especially the number 89 was kept very subtle simply because its shape looks like it was painted with chalk or something like that. And this is probably the most satisfying part of the entire video, so I'll just let you watch. I have to say I'm pleased with the result. The letters have the exact contours like the real thing. The only negative is that the entire side is way too big and should be about 1 centimeter shorter. I didn't measure the model properly because I'm dumb, and this is the result. Nonetheless, it's a small price to pay for me, and the remaining markings came out quite okay. There were still a couple of them missing, but because those were so small to a point where they were almost illegible in the photos, I just hand painted them with brush. Now I just had to seal everything under a few layers of clear varnish. I normally use pure gloss, but because I need this model to look really faded, I decided to try this semi-gloss from Tamiya for the first time. And to be quite frank, I'm impressed. The surface is nice and smooth, but not overly glossy, and I might even keep using it in the future. Highly recommended. And finally, I quickly removed the masking tape from periscopes because I won't need it anymore. The airbrushing stage is over, so it's time to enjoy the results. Even though there were a few complications along the way, aka some of the markings came out way too big, which is my mistake, and I also completely failed with the distressing technique, I'm still very happy with the result, and it's good to be working on a light colored vehicle for a change. I feel like the upcoming steps are gonna be a ton of fun. I also want to give a big shout out and sincere thank you to my friend Alex Wegner from Solidscale, who made those stencils for me. He has a lot of useful stencils and other stuff in his store, so if you're looking for more common markings such as tank insignia or even hard-edged camouflage stencils, check out his webpage. I'll leave the link in the description. And with that, I just want to say thank you all for watching, I'll see you mates in the next one, and here are some bloopers. It's a I also know this. So the point of this step is not adding highlights or shadows, just run. Now some of you might already know what I'm doing. Trying and doing is dewing. You can use it to create literally. You can use it to create. You can use it to create literally. You can use it to create Life color paints are great for brush application. Life color paints are great for brush application. and almost. This will ensure the stencil won't fall apart while I'm manipulating. I kept aiming the airbrush completely straight against the surface to avoid any accidental. Although these stencils hold well, it's again better to be safe than sorry. And the only negative, and to be quite frank,